Hi everyone, welcome to another Benefits Brain Food session. Today we talk to David Tourle and we go through a fantastic journey with him, how he explains how he used to be an intermediary. He then went in-house into HR to work for an organization, and now he's set up his own consulting firm. So a fantastically interesting journey. We also talk a lot with David about global trends in benefits, global trends in communications, engagement, and also how to do things like audit your existing benefit package from that global viewpoint. So it's really relevant to everything that's going on right now for lots of corporations out there in HR.
Yeah, 100%. I think anyone that's tried to approach designing and implementing a global benefit strategy before will absolutely resonate with everything that David covers. It's not an easy task. There are considerations, but he covers them off really eloquently. And I think there's a lot of sound advice in here for anyone that's thinking about delivering a global strategy for reward and well-being.
Exactly. So catch up next time. Please like and subscribe and find us on all the usual socials. Hi, David. Great to see you and have you on the show. It'd be good if you could just give us an introduction as to who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jack. And hi, Matt. So I'm the founder and director of Chime Global Benefits, which is a global benefits consultancy based in London, UK. I'm currently in southwest London, UK, in my attic with horrible Wi-Fi connection, kids and wife downstairs running around causing trouble, which is, I think, the same for most people these days in the current lockdown environment. A little bit about my background. I've recently just left Boston Consulting Group, where I was Global Benefits Director for 3 years. And prior to that, I've been in consultancy. So I was at Capita, helping out with their global benefits team and doing some other pretty interesting stuff there. And I trained in global benefits at Aon, which is an organization most people have been through one time or another. So yeah, that goes back over the last decade at least anyway.
Nice.
Great. Good to see you, like I said.
Yeah. And I've been quite looking forward to this conversation because I was quite keen to kind of hear about your transition from, one side of the fence to the other, and kind of what that looks like, and I guess kind of what you came up against. Like, what's it been like, kind of transitioning from provider, so to speak, through into those kind of in-house roles, and then obviously now as a kind of standalone consultancy.
Brutal is the honest answer. It's they're worlds apart. I mean, I did quite a bit of consultancy work before moving in-house, and lots of different things as well. So different types of clients, from multinationals to large domestics. And I think broadly speaking, consultancy, it can look and feel very different depending on where you are and how companies like to behave. But there's always the same, the challenge of learning your client, and then doing the best you can with the resources you have, and often feeling maybe slightly boxed in by the resources you have of whatever it is that your organization's selling, and there's always that commercial pressure on you as well, which I found wherever I've been from a consultancy perspective, which tends to drive your activity somewhat. Moving in-house into BCG, it was actually it was sort of sold to me, billed to me as a consulting role in-house, and very much it was you sort of in a center of excellence type environment where there's a lot of need for expertise around the world. But I think the thing that struck me, straight away, and people asking me after 3 or 4 weeks, what's it like, how's it different? I think the answer is a lot more in-house. You know way more about your organization, about your client. And even then, as someone in a center of expertise, you probably only know 50 or 60% of what there is to know, and you're very much reliant on those that are around you that have been in the organization longer to get along and get things happening. BCG was an environment where that was excellent, and lots of people who were really good enablers within the business. But then it made me reflect straight away to kind of the old things that are trotted out from consultancies, which is we'll know you best, we'll know you better, we'll partner with you to understand you the best. And the truth is, I think from a consultancy perspective, you can only ever know about 10% of what your client knows.
As little as 10.
Yeah, well, exactly. Maybe that's just I'm a really bad consultant. I don't know. But that was my overriding impression of moving in-house. Was it's so different. The subject matters that you touch on, quite exciting being able to frustrate consultants and push them back and say, no, wait, we haven't got time for that now. We haven't got budget for that now. But then flipping back over the fence into a consultancy role again, having knowledge of those frustrations and perhaps having a more intuitive knowledge of why things take time, where there might be sticking points within an organization, and being able to preempt some of the things that they perhaps don't know, because maybe you have been in-house further along the journey than they have. It can be really, really helpful. But yeah, very, very, very different, even though notionally you're dealing with the same subjects.
Yeah, I guess there's a bit of sort of life imitating art, imitating life about it, because you didn't just go in-house from an intermediary perspective. You went from an intermediary to an in-house at one of the biggest consulting firms in the world, household name management consultants, and also a big job there, right? So did you have any misconceptions about that when you first went? Did you think, oh, come on, look, I've only got one renewal to do in each benefit, and it doesn't matter which country, I've still only got one client, so it's got to be easier than managing what I did before.
Yeah, I suppose I didn't really know what to expect at BCG, and what I uncovered was, amazing things. First of all, when, like I said, exceptional people, like really, really good people. And one of the interesting things, and I've learned this about the management consultancy industry in particular, is because of their pyramid model for the consultancy, kind of the up or out. You get promoted or you're out. There are lots and lots of off ramps for good people that start on the consultancy side, and so that means that the internal functions at somewhere like a BCG, and I think it's the same at McKinsey, and I was reflecting with a friend at KPMG the other day that it's very similar there, that the in-house functions are full of exceptionally gifted and bright people who are sort of learning their specialisms. So they've gone from being maybe a general consultant to being an HR expert or whatever it would be. But what you find, and what I found, was the level of conversation is really, really high. And the level of challenge is really, really, really high. So, you're bracing yourself sometimes every day for the conversation, and it can be really, really invigorating. You can have some of the greatest days when you win a battle. You can have some of the hardest days when you get squashed. It's that kind of environment, but immensely rewarding. And I think the other big thing I found out there is, every organization, it doesn't matter what the brand name looks like or how well they're perceived in the public, that they have their issues, they have their things they're trying to battle. They have their budget challenges, they have their well-being challenges, they have their management challenges, and it's just a case of finding out what flavor they are and finding the right solution for it. But yeah, it was a great place to be.
It sounds like there was a lot going on there, so certainly enough to keep you busy while you're there. So talking of those challenges, what were the kind of key things that you kind of identified early on in that role, when you were kind of in-house and thinking, okay, right, there's a couple of icebergs ahead that we're going to have to avoid, or what were your kind of initial go-tos in terms of what you wanted to do, and what was the kind of biggest frustration there?
Well, I was very lucky that I walked into a really well-functioning team, and had excellent line management, that had already identified to some degree what the road ahead looked like. Some of the big things that BCG were wrestling with and are still wrestling with, I think are really common to what a lot of firms are wrestling with too. So cloud automation was a really big bit across all elements of HR, and working out how that looked. And that was particularly challenging at BCG because they had, I suppose my take on it is they'd consulted themselves about 10 years ago, and they had their own homegrown stuff that worked but was obsolete and needed to be moved on. So that was a big bit. The kind of the well-being challenges that are not unique but very common within the management consulting industry. they were facing. So burnout and some severe mental well-being challenges, particularly in the consulting side of the business, but increasingly in other parts of the business were really huge. But thankfully, BCG is a well-capitalized place that had the resources and time and dedication to fixing them. I think one of the biggest challenges that had the kind of the biggest headline internally was the transformation the firm was going through from being a very traditional management consultancy with its kind of Ivy League and Oxbridge graduates, really kind of general consultants who are bought in, and that classic pyramid model, to being a firm which is digitally enabled and has digital consultants. And so we found ignore the organization of everything, but from a benefits perspective, the programs which the firm had were really built upon the really old traditional paternalistic model. So, sort of pensions, expensive healthcare, expensive disability benefits, all those sorts of things, which, a young tech grad or a young business grad in Berlin or San Francisco doesn't understand, doesn't see the relevance of. So how the big challenge was transforming that, communicating what was there in a better way to make it seem relevant. There's only so far you can go with that, because it's still pensions, healthcare, and life and disability, to introducing other more interesting things and sort of flipping it from being, really reactive style benefits to being, preventative on the healthcare side and proactive on the well-being side, and finances and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, some really big stuff to work through. I don't think it was different to anywhere else. It just had its flavor, its uniqueness about it.
Great. And obviously your previous experience and your future direction of travel focuses on the global elements of benefits and HR.
Yeah.
What has been the biggest trends in recent years, but also looking ahead, what are companies looking at in the global space? And I don't want to use the C word, but I don't. Huh?
Do it.
No, not that C word. COVID dependent or not, even if COVID wasn't here, where are we going in global benefits in the next couple of years? Or if we have to react and do stuff about COVID, where do you think the next couple of years look?
So I think where we're looking is, it comes from lots of different directions. So I think the first thing is, if you look at what's happening with, ultimately benefits, and I'm not talking pure benefits, I'm talking about pensions and life and disability and healthcare. They spring from whatever is happening within the social structure of a country. So that would be whatever the government is saying, whatever is required from a social security perspective. The benefits tend to be kind of bolt-ons. They top up from that, and what you're finding is increasingly around the world, and from my perspective, what I'm observing is there's an increased acceleration of governments around the world saying, employers, you've got to help us out with the retirement incomes of your employees. You've got to take more responsibility for that, and in some countries that's particularly in Western Europe, that's changing a lot. There's big change. See, we've just been through in the UK. There's change happening in France. There's change happening in the Netherlands and Germany, and it's going on and on and on and on. So there's a massive governance issue, or it's a live issue, but it's going to get worse in the future for global employers, I think. And on the kind of the healthcare side, I think you're seeing something similar. You're seeing governments having less money to spend on their health services, and employers really needing to take on the burden of that. Certainly, if they want to keep up the image of being sort of employers of choice, or whatever the trite phrase of the moment is. So that's becoming super important, even more so than it was before. And then I think, staying with healthcare for a minute, one of the things which is being driven everywhere is the move to prevention within healthcare. So we're no longer just pay and claim, or just you paying out against an issue that's already there. There's massive expectation now And I think it's being driven by governments and by companies and by providers themselves who see an issue with the traditional model of prevention within healthcare. So that's everything from, I guess, early intervention on the telemedicine and that sort of thing. But there's a real renewed interest in some of the stuff which kind of went out of fashion, like health screening and things like that. There's new and interesting ways of doing that. So I think if you look at what's core there in terms of the benefits, there's a lot changing. And so as an employer, as a global employer, it's really easy to get left behind. And so I think some of the massive employers, a lot of the big employers, have got their arms around it, and they've got great governance models being put in place. And I think you look at some of the traditional things that Aon and Mercer have done really, really well over the years, global broking models and things like that. If you look at what's happening, there's some really good, interesting incumbents who are challenging there. And I think that's because companies have seen the need for better governance. So the likes of Lockton and Howden and those guys are coming in, and you're starting to see a lot more competition in that market. And I think that's driven by this need for governance. Sometimes the RFP said its cost. My perspective is that the real thing that companies are worried about is that risk, that governance element they've got to get their arms around.
Yeah. And I guess the the risk thing, on that point is increasing at the moment, isn't it? And I guess it never goes down, let's be honest, but it's probably increasing exponentially faster now than it has done before, with a lot of the topics we've talking about before, are the fact that people's well-being strategies are being tested properly now, and if they did have cracks before and they weren't watertight, it's now very, very apparent, like what those issues look like and how they're manifesting. And also, whilst we have this kind of focus on, more towards kind of prevention rather than cure, and we know the reasons for that, right? It's more sustainable. There's a number of incentives for that as well, isn't there? So a lot of providers will provide discounts on premiums if you can demonstrate that you have a number of preventative measures in place, whether it's the health screenings, wearables, or something like that. But I think more so now, which is we kind of touched on it very briefly as you were kind of going through those points around kind of what the hell is happening right now, is how the well-being part of a benefits program plays a much more fundamental role now, I think, in the employee value proposition. They've always had a place, but I think now it's proportionally much, much higher in terms of, firstly, how it's thought about within an organization, like what is well-being, how do we quantify it, how do we measure it, how do we deliver it, but also like the expectations, I guess, from the employee to kind of support them, right? How do you if someone's kind of listening to this and thinking, right, we do need to have a review of kind of what we're doing, and we do need to get under the hood of those kind of well-being programs, either in a single country or at a global level, kind of where do you start? Where do you start with the initial audit? Where do you start with the initial design? Like, what are those kind of first initial steps so you can kind of start this process of kind of improvement for well-being?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is there are about 50 answers depending on who you're talking to, and I think it was just to pick up on something you said there, Matt. It's well-being's becoming a more important part of the employer value proposition. I think my perspective is that that's probably where it's sitting at the moment. I'm not convinced. I certainly haven't seen a lot to say that well-being programs are really driving well-being and really supporting well-being within organizations. And by well-being programs, I mean things that derive from benefits. I don't mean, really kind of top-down, led by the CEO type well-being initiatives, which are looking fundamentally at how people operate day to day, about how teams are designed. And those, I think, that's really where it needs to be sitting. I think if you're looking at well-being from a benefits perspective and what's on offer in the market, it can only go so far. But having said that, there's some things around which, like you say, are becoming kind of almost like hygiene factors. They're kind of expected as part of as part of the value proposition. And there's a lot around. I think in every market. So I think the place I would start would be to use whatever data you have as a firm to try and understand, what your picture is, no matter how limited it is. And I'd say that because it's such a big picture. It almost doesn't matter where you start the jigsaw puzzle from. Like you'd love to be able to start in the corners and then work along and then work inwards, but I think the reality
sounds easy, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it
does.
I
thought that was only my trick. I didn't think anyone else knew that.
Yeah, but it's really not that easy. So a lot of firms will be dependent. Well, it's difficult to know. So let's say it's a mid-sized multinational, and let's say you've got 100 or 200 people in the country. So you're big enough to have maybe some experience within your healthcare program. Then you can start to get data out the back of it. If you're very, very small as an organization, you've got some problems in that getting hold of data can be really, really hard from your providers. But you've also got some massive benefits that it's really easy to drive change, or a lot easier to drive change. So it doesn't matter whether you're big or small, you've got pros and cons. But let's say you're a medium-sized multinational. I think the obvious place to start is to look at the data you've got. That will mean going to your providers, going to your brokers, and really pushing them, really testing them. I think what I see, kind of coming a little bit back to brokerage and advice, is that a lot of companies don't know how to use the advice and the providers that they've already got. You're not making use of everything that's there, and that could be everything from data propositions which already sit there. So if you've got a multinational pool, which tens of thousands of companies do, there's great data there waiting to be harvested and used, but it often just gets left there sitting quite redundant. So have a look at it. Understand from your healthcare provider, what your claims are looking like, what your trends are, what the areas are that your employees are seeking help. And then do what you can, pick off the top 3 and do what you can. So if you've got big problems with, musculoskeletal, talk to occupational health and safety, see what you can do about that. If you've got big problems in the mental well-being space, a lot of healthcare plans are doing a lot about this now. See what you can do and see what advice you can get. What I'd say is, I think with all well-being programs, they have to be driven from a really senior level within the organization, and they have to be treated. They have to be treated as something which is super important. If they're driven by benefits or payroll, they're not going to get anywhere. I think you have to be able to take something, do it really, really well. If you think that sleep is the problem, take sleep and do sleep really, really, really well. If you think that work-life balance is the problem, take that and actively do something about it and do it well. Don't try and throw everything. I think the last thing I'd say is there's, because it's such a live topic at the moment, there's a whole heap of innovation. There's a whole heap of new products out there. Some of them are rubbish. Some of them are absolutely fantastic. And where I think firms can start getting quite a lot of value is in having a look at some of the things like, there's well-being calendars out there, for instance, which give you a really, really kind of simple, easy, effective way of bringing topics to your population without having to think about it. Let other people do some of that thinking for you. So again, use your advisors, use your brokers, and test them. Let them find something that's going to work for you and get them to give you decent advice. I think that's probably where I'd start.
Great advice.
No, I like that. Just think about the comment you made there around having to get that strategy right from the very, very top and making sure that you almost cascade that, infect it within an organization. In your role as the Global Benefits Director, was it very centralized? Were you able to cascade that information globally? Did you ever get any pushback from different countries? Were places in different states that, actually they were further behind, further ahead, and the strategy was something that had to evolve to account for that? Or was it very much, this is what we need to do, and everyone sort of fell in line?
Yeah, good question. So the BCG, BCG is a very, very decentralized place that's trying
Okay.
to think. And that's it's good and bad. It can be tough to get things done, and I think that was true for the people that were really focused on well-being. I'll come back to that in a second. But decentralized organizations can also be, really great and really effective when it comes to delivering change, because there is that often very strong local ownership, and ownership at a scale which is, you can enable change. And BCG was very much like that. So, the local leaders, the local senior partners, or those that actually are invested in owning the business, they were able to have real influence over the people that were working in the same location as them. And I think what was great about it was when the decision was taken to make change at BCG, it happened, and it happened really quickly. And I think that's because, and it's something I actually reflect on now quite a lot as a small business owner myself, is that you really care. The partners there, they really care about the staff that are working for them. And I've heard comments, and I think this happens in all management and professional services firms. They're like, that's driven by money, but actually I don't think it is. I think it's driven by decency, and I think it's driven by humanity. So there is that real care, and change can really happen. So working with decentralized firms as a global consultant can be an absolute nightmare, because who's taking the decision? At the same time, if you can get things right, you can really drive the change. But yeah, so reflecting on BCG and the well-being question there, Jack. So what they found, and what the global benefits team, global well-being team did really effectively, was lobbying for change at the center. This relentless level of almost sales work going on to drive the message home at the place where it could have global level change impact. Often there, with benefits and other kind of change initiatives, they were going in at the country level, and with mixed success. Sometimes you get people that get it and they want to make change straight away. Sometimes you get pushback, and you then go through this painful process of trying to influence and go around them, and then get that pushed down on top. So I think the team at BCG made a great decision very early on, which is lobby hard and lobby at the center, and bring real expertise in as well. So they made a few really excellent strategic hires who are true well-being experts, and brought them in to help drive that change. Now, that's something that's beyond the reach of a lot of organizations. They won't be able to do that. There's cost constraints, there's hiring constraints, and there's not that many people that know much about it to bring them in. But for BCG, that was a really successful strategy. And it meant that, within a matter of, I guess, 5 or 6 months of starting out, senior leadership was starting to tease up some of the changes that they wanted to make. And they weren't just teasing it up with their own teams and internal discussions. There were public noises going on about the need for change, and almost starting that noise at the same time as the global wellbeing program was being built. Had just this really strong, overwhelming effect of meaning that when they were ready to press the button, they were ready to go with stuff. The business was ready for it to happen. So that was a really effective strategy that BCG took.
Sure. And I think on that point, like the timing, I guess couldn't have been better, if there was that kind of push for, the global wellbeing strategy to kind of almost ride that momentum, while mindsets were in a place of change, to kind of lobby for those, other, things that are, required or deemed, necessary from a wellbeing standpoint, at a kind of central level. So you're right. When I think about these things is, you do have teams that are in so many different circumstances. Some of them, have a lot of capital, a lot of budget, and things are going for them really well at the moment. Others, not so much. Some are, some are still very much in kind of business continuity mode, and ensuring that the lights are staying on, right? And that's not just this year or next year, in current climate. That can be at any given time, depending on where that business is, in its potentially maturity cycle, or what the way its market's behaving. So are there any like tips you would give to someone listening, if they're part of a wellbeing team, part of a total rewards team, and they really want to kind of instigate this change, and they need to buid this case for lobbying internally, but they just don't have the resource to go and hire the experts or anything like that? Have you got any kind of tips for people like that, to the best way to get hold of that information, or to get those kind of that credible insight inside the organization to support that kind of lobbying activity?
Yeah, well, I think the stuff that you guys are doing is a great example of what people can do. There is a huge amount of really credible free resources out there to use. I think the one thing that we've seen, I'm personally experiencing with the growth of a new business, is the power of the network. People want to help people. I think the competitive barrier when it comes to doing well-being is a weird phrase, isn't it? But supporting well-being.
Let's do well-being. Yeah. When it comes to supporting well-being, I think there's a very thin line. We've all had public access to what Google are doing for years and years and years, because they saw that what they're doing is great and they're willing to share it. So I would say, use your network and start talking. Consultants will try and sell you stuff, but there's a lot to be learned from having a chat with consultants. And what I say is, I can maybe just repeating something I said a little bit earlier as well, which is choose something, even if it's just quite small, and do it and get going on it. One of the things, one of the people that I reflect on was a lady called Natalie Chung. I'm sure Natalie won't mind me mentioning her name at BCG. She's one of the most incredibly effective people I've met, and she was for a period responsible for UK benefits, but also took on this kind of a pseudo responsibility for well-being, and really just picked things up and ran with it. And I guess in her spare time was able to create some really, really interesting and exceptionally useful content that went live on the internet at BCG, which was picked up and actually turned into things which could be used globally. So that was her being very benevolent, and picking things up, running with it to try and impact change. And ultimately people thought, well, that's great, let's use this, let's run with it. Natalie also instigated the Global Steps Challenge at BCG, which is something a lot of organizations do. And it's what I observed there, and it wasn't just Natalie, it was other people too. If the energy and the effort is put into something, and sustained, then you will get people on the bus with you. You won't be left hanging out there on your own for long. So I think, I think all too often in organizations, people don't follow what they're interested in and what they're passionate about. They follow what they're told to do. I would say be a little bit dangerous. If you've got some spare time, learn about it, do it, use the free resources and see what impact you can have. Because it will come back. It will come back round. Yeah, I have met Natalie actually. I think I met her in an awards ceremony a few years back, and she's certainly very direct and very driven. I remember her explaining what it is she wanted to achieve and what she wants to do. So it's glad to hear that kind of obviously a lot of that worked out.
Sorry, Natalie, if you're not comfortable with me mentioning your name on here, I should check with her actually before her name goes out.
Don't worry. We had a conversation with the guest the other day that said, "Can you just, you're not going to put reindeer antlers on me or anything, are you? Like a red nose." Now this is going to be the Natalie Chung podcast, and
we didn't make any promises.
Yeah. I want to ask you a bit of a funny question actually, because I know you've mixed it up a bit in your career. Yeah. Obviously, you're doing what you want to do right now, which is an ambition of lots of people in doing your own organization. I think I want to kind of exclude that from your choice, right? But if you had to go back to either on the intermediary side, working with banks of clients, enacting transformations in lots of different organizations as an advisor kind of thing, or the in-house person, which door would you rather go back into?
Consulting, without
Okay.
it's funny, I've asked that question to other people who've been similar, and you get a different answer for everybody. I think the consulting suits my personality. Maybe I'm very shallow. Maybe I work on the surface a little bit. But no, I find the challenge of taking something that's brand new, so from that kind of the sales edge, through to a solution, really rewarding. Now that it's my own business, obviously there's personal investment in that, and it's even better. So it's more of a buzz, and I feel like I'm more invested in my clients and those things. But even, when I was consulting before, there's that real energy you get from the email landing. Let's find out about this. It's new. Let's go and see what it is, and that creative process. I found in some roles more than others. I found where you have an organization that's willing to kind of let the shackles off a bit, let you be creative, and go and do what you think is right, and backing you to do what you think is right. And that's not just the organization. That's having a good boss too. And I've had some great bosses over the years. That's where I've really found passion in my career, is doing those things. Almost the kind of the benefits and the well-being bit is kind of like a sideline, because that's I didn't choose this career. I think it chose me a little bit. I think a lot of people in our industry maybe stumbled
anyone
into
chose
it.
But
Who would think HR if they had a choice?
We
need benefits brain food bingo, like what is said on each episode, because that is coming up like every episode.
Really?
It
chose them.
It's like Bane from Batman, isn't it? Like you just adopted HR. I was born into it.
I'd say I fell into it. Yeah, it's one of those things. And actually, I only got into global benefits because I decided I was overseas for a few years, and I decided to move back to England in the middle of the financial crisis, at the end of the last decade, and it was it was pretty much the only job I could get. And I was lucky to be in Aon, and I came back across into Aon, but it required a lot of networking and making sure that I was able to feed myself for a few years.
I mean, that'll do it. Yeah.
Very, very lucky that I found something I can ply my trade at. But yeah, no, consulting is where my passion lies.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Long answer to a simple question.
No.
So, obviously you're at the point now where you're engaging with a number of different clients, and some larger, some smaller, and they're clearly going to be at kind of different stages, I guess. So is there anything that's kind of common that you see between your client to client, like a common challenge that seems to be quite prevalent in the market right now, or conversely, anything that's particularly kind of surprised you, or kind of caught you off guard as you started to kind of get into these conversations?
Yeah. So nothing too surprising. I think that you always find with some clients, and they come to you, and I think they know they have problems. Some clients come to you and they go, we know we have a problem with this. We know we're wasting money here. We know that this isn't particularly effective. We know there might be some tax liabilities here, or whatever it is. Come and help us out, and that's great. I think that one of the really, really common themes that I'm coming across, and I'm deliberately trying to work with organizations who are early on in their global journey, sort of early to kind of mid-mature a little bit, is the need to do a few things. One is to think about how they can reward their employees and protect their employees in a consistent way from country to country. That's a really common theme in global benefits. And what you find is a lot of organizations, particularly organizations that are born these days, are what I might call sort of globally native, right? So they almost, from like employee 2 or employee 3, they've got somebody overseas, and you see these pockets of employees everywhere, and they're growing up. And then you end up with this almost immediate conflict between what an employer wants to be from a global perspective, that consistent treatment, helping people have a similar experience of being an employee wherever they are in the world. So you get the conflict between that and the reality of being plonked down into a country which has its rules and regulations, its market trends, its consistent ways of doing things. It's things that you understand as a native of that country, but maybe that conflicts with what your employer wants. And so that's a really, really common and consistent thing. And there are some really big challenges with that. Organizationally, there are some big challenges for employers around that. Philosophically, there are some big challenges. There are some markets where healthcare doesn't exist, right? It's just not a thing that you do. But if your home base is the US, healthcare is everything you do, right? And so there's a big conflict there. So helping employers through and shifting the mindset almost to being consistent philosophically, but different in delivery, and that's a really common thing that you get through. And I think the sooner an organization wrestles with that, and it's not just a benefits thing either, it's a compensation thing too, and it's an everything thing when it comes to HR. It's that local flavor is so important. Local laws and regulations, right down from from hiring through to firing, is different in every country. But you do need to wrestle with that. And I think where I'm really grateful is having the opportunity to influence firms that are on that journey, and making sure that benefits aren't forgotten, because ultimately benefits are value wise relatively small compared to the compensation and sometimes the shares and the equity. In terms of what they do for you as an employee and as an employer, that safety blanket, kind of the last line of defense, sometimes the first line of defense, and keeping you as an active participant in the organization. It's so important. Having those working for you as an employer, but also within the local context, is so important. It's nice to be able to say to firms, don't forget benefits, and let's make it right.
And it's that term of like the forgotten benefits, right? And I know that Jack and I have kind of visited that a number of times, because often there are, we might not think about them as benefits, but as Jack would say, if it's something that the employee gets from you that they won't get if they weren't there and they were on the street, then we could classify that as a benefit. And it doesn't need to have a monetary value against it. It could be a cultural benefit, it could be an impactful benefit, it could be something that's more kind of experiential, right? And I know that when some of the organizations, when they're approaching global benefits strategies themselves, and we could have a whole other hour on this topic alone, I've seen them approach it in a couple of different ways. And one of the ways that you were mentioning, where it's look, we will have a common, we'll have parity of philosophy across all of our countries, and then it's up to them what they do. And then I've seen the other side where they say we'll have the parity of philosophy and strategy country to country, and actually we're going to set global minima. So our global minima for life insurance is going to be 2 times. Doesn't matter what the market says, doesn't matter what the going rate is. It's 2, or at least 2, or at least 4, and then we top up whatever, but we never go below it, because that's our minima. And I've kind of been in situations before where we've had to kind of do global audits where we say, right, okay, well, we know what you want to do, and it's this. We know what you're doing, and we know what the market says, and therefore the output is this, and that's the kind of recommendation. Is it just a horses for courses situation? If it works for you, do it. Or do you see any particular advantage of any approach in either setting global minimums or not setting a global minimum, or just leaving it at philosophy, or trying to do a strategy? Is there any advantage in any one of those?
I think the advantage is in thinking about it. And it can literally be left at that. If you see it as a problem and then you go on a journey of thinking about it, I think that's going to lead to probably a pragmatic outcome, regardless of whether or not you do decide to set minimum standards. So that just that process alone. BCG, we have minimum standards, but then we had different minimum standards for different parts of the business, and I won't go into too much detail. That's all it's all stuff that we don't need to cover, but it worked because as a global team who is trying to deliver advice outwards, there's a point at which you have to say, we can disagree, but we're on the same team. And actually the captain of the team, so in this case, the executive committee or the CEO or whoever that might be, has said that this is our minimum standard and this is what we're going to follow. So let's work around that and use that as our context. So in terms of that as a kind of a global benefits function, if you like, so if I'm speaking to a global benefits function now, that can be an extremely useful tool to have, within your armory, to, well, sometimes to affect change, but it's really just to get things done. And I've got so much respect for organizations that have been on that journey and say we value the lives that are working for us. We value our employees enough to think that this is really, really important. And actually, what would we do as an organization if this employee were to pass away or to get disabled or whatever it might be? To have gone through that process, thought about it, and put in place some minimums for how we wish to behave as an organization. I think it's great. One of the things that we don't do though is we don't tell people about it, right? So would we ever come out? Would we ever come out to our employees and say, this is what we think, this is our philosophy? So I say we, like the royal we, the collective we, but it's, some organizations are great at it. They're great at kind of putting their philosophical stamp on what they do and saying, this is what we believe and this is how we believe people should be treated. But so many don't. There's so many organizations I've worked with who have those thoughts, have those philosophies, but then there's this breakdown when it comes to actually physically telling your employees about it. And that to me feels like lost value. So there's so much you can do as a firm in terms of thinking about these things and the philosophies, but if you don't tell people about it, then you're really, really lost. And I guess that's where you guys come in, with your Thompson's history and all those things around, the transformation that you guys have helped lead in terms of how leading employers communicate and do things around benefits. So.
David, that's great. Thanks so much for coming on the show. The insight's been really interesting. It's been fascinating to hear lots of different sides of the fence that you've been on. If our viewers and listeners want to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
LinkedIn's probably the best place, Jack. Yeah, on LinkedIn or the Chime Global Benefits website. Either way, whichever's easiest.
Brilliant. So thanks again for coming on. It's been good to see you again, and I'm sure we'll catch up soon.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Speak soon, David.
Cheers, David.
Cheers.